What's wrong with many IIoT concepts? Last time, Andy Brazier and I talked about the need for people to operate chemical plants and their hazardous processes. People make the difference to overcome such unforeseeable crises like the COVID or the recent power outage in Texas. We also talked about the emerging better technology available, the Industrial Internet of Things, IIoT, or Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, and let's describe those all as machines. The challenge we all are faced with today is to combine those both, the human and the machines. And that brings me to my first question for Andy. You as a human factors and safety expert, what do you think about the IIoT concepts you have seen?
My concern is that the person in the system is just being seen as just another thing, just like a sensor or a piece of machinery. And I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that makes the best use of the person in the system. As an added concern is that I think IoT and the like can add complexity to our systems. And we know that complexity makes it far more difficult to understand the risks and to work out how we are supposed to manage them.
So thinking about that, could you please give an example about such shortcomings you saw during your long career?
I think the introduction of digital control systems has had its benefits, but the problem is it creates more data and it has created a lot more alarms. And what we've ended up doing, particularly with alarms, is forcing our operators to be reactive all the time. What we really want them to do is to be proactive. I've certainly seen technology introduced over the years that has never been used because the people either didn't understand what it was doing or didn't trust it. And I've seen automated systems which were supposed to make the job of the operator far easier, but actually they've been so complicated to set up that they've been a distraction from the rest of the job that has to be done.
That's an interesting point. So you're talking about human to machine communication, and that brings me to another question, because it's also about human to human communication between one shift and another shift, between the shift teams as well as the senior team like process engineers on day shift. So how relevant is the human communication to operations in these days?
Well, we've always known that communication from person to person is important, and I suppose we've hoped that technology would help that. We can all carry a mobile phone, but the danger is that just means we get more and more phone calls which overload people. I think as our process systems have become more complex, it takes people a long time to understand what's going on. And so if they can communicate what they've understood to somebody else effectively, that other person doesn't need to put all that effort into understanding what's happening, compared to if they're just presented with all the data, everyone has to start from scratch every time.
And that sounds interesting also, that drives kind of the area of actionable data. But very concrete, what would you recommend being changed? And can you give us such a concrete example?
Well, I would say let's look at shift handover. That gives us a good insight into how concepts like IIoT have to pay more attention to the human-to-human communication, which is always going to be a requirement. I mean, the shift handover can be an excellent source of very valuable information that goes useful beyond the shift team. Just imagine, how useful it could be if you were an engineer or a manager to not only have some data telling you what's happened, but also having a nice rich description from the operator about the event. What did they do to diagnose why it happened, and how did they deal with it?
Could you give some of the benefits, or could you talk a bit about how beneficial this was for the manufacturers?
Well, I would say it's an example. What could happen is the human just is another thing on our network, and they just create more and more data that we have to deal with. But if we allow them to actually use their creativity and their problem-solving skills, and we can capture that in a useful way, we have a much better understanding of what's happening out there, what's happening in the world, and why is it happening.
I think that's very interesting, and also that gives some further fruits for thoughts, hopefully also for the audience and the folks out there listening. So please react with what you're thinking about. What did work for you? What did not work? How did you overcome challenges in your IoT concepts and the concepts Andy and I talked about? Stay safe and goodbye.
Goodbye.